I lived a debased life and drank heavily. But I started smoking even more and more, trying to chase that feeling that I got the first time I used it. After that marriage ended, I found recovery. I told God exactly who I am and what I'm dealing with, and I begged His help in dealing with it. I asked my sponsor, what should I be working on? He said, well, what are you working on? I said, my humility. He said, that's the reason you suck at humility. So you're not supposed to be working on it. You're supposed to ask God to do it. Most of my troubles are centered in my ego. Yes, my story begins as a child. I'm an old man now. I'm 69. I was raised by very good parents in a loving family with strict religious upbringing. I had a certain level of selfishness and self-centeredness that I think probably most people have. And I went to Bible college and was reading in the scriptures that people in the Bible drank. And one of the things I was told is never drink. And so I took that suggestion out of the Bible that it's okay to drink. And so I started drinking. But the thing is, I didn't know how to control it. And they say that alcoholics tend to have a gene that makes them an alcoholic, whereas some people can drink and a drink or so will be enough. And I didn't have that enough switch on me. And so I would generally drink to get drunk. And they say that a man takes a drink, and then the drink takes the drink, and then the drink takes the man. And that's what happened to me. I drank for several years, and it got worse and worse as it went along. And I continued to go to church, but I felt like a total hypocrite because of the way I lived when I wasn't at church. I did more than just drink. I did a lot of sordid things that I'm not proud of, and I don't want to really mention here. Don't want to drag it out. So I'll just say that I lived a debased life and drank heavily for several years. I got married, and it wasn't until I got divorced from that marriage that I started drinking in earnest. And the pain of that separation from my children and from my wife, I tried to drown that with alcohol. And that's when I started drinking in earnest. It was uncontrolled, and it got out of control. I got divorced from that marriage after 15 years. I was single for a couple of years, and then I got married again, wife number 2. That marriage lasted for 5 years, and I tried to control my drinking while I was married, but I wasn't very successful at it. After that marriage ended, I drank very hard again, and it was after that marriage ended, I found recovery. I started going to AA. I was told that AA could help me. And I know for me, I could never quit alcohol without AA. And I'm very grateful for what AA taught me. AA really taught me how to live. It taught me how to look at myself. I never knew how to look at myself, how to examine my heart, how to accept the things that I couldn't change, and how to change the things that I could. So I got sober, and after less than 2 years, I got married again. And they say that alcoholics are not very good at relationships, and I'm here to prove it. My life proves that. I'm surprised that I was married for 15 years the first time. And that woman must have really loved me to stick with me as long as she did. One of my ex-wives later on told me that. So, and I believe she was right. So I got married the third time, and that marriage was pretty rocky too. I worked the 12 steps best I knew how, the best I could at the time. It just didn't affect me the way that it did later on, and I'll get into that. After that third marriage ended, it ended after 10 years. I had heard about marijuana, and so I tried marijuana. And a lot of people in AA say it's okay to use marijuana. A lot of people say that it isn't. And I was of the persuasion that it would be okay a little bit, but I can't do anything just a little bit. And so I smoked marijuana very much like I drank all the time, and a lot of it. The difference between marijuana and alcohol is marijuana stops working after a while. And so I started smoking even more and more, trying to chase that feeling that I got the first time I used it. And it got to the point where I was afraid I was going to drink. I never drank while I used marijuana because I knew alcohol would kill me. I was convinced of that. The idea that I could ever drink again had been smashed. I got to the point after about 2 years of using marijuana that I knew something would have to change. I went to hear my sponsor speak one time, and he said that while he was speaking on the 12 steps, he said that what you drink is ethyl alcohol. When you take the water out of that, you have a gas, and it's called ether. And I thought, well, that's a drug. That's a strong drug. And so I realized that I'd been a drug addict all along and didn't know it. When I first started smoking marijuana, I thought, well, I'm an alcoholic. I'm not a damn drug addict. When I realized I'd been a drug addict all along, I knew that I had a problem with marijuana, and that the only way I was going to get help is to go to something other than AA. I went to NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and I started my recovery over again there. This time, however, I had really been humbled by the relapse on drugs, and I intensely worked the steps like I had never worked them before. My sponsor said that anybody with significant recovery that loses that recovery has a very, very, very hard time recovering again. When I first got to AA, 15 years prior to this, they said that your chances of recovery is about 5%. You got about a 5% chance of recovering and staying recovered from alcohol when you first start. And I realized that, and that's the reason I worked it as hard as I did the first time. This time, he said that your chances are less than half of 1% of getting recovery and keeping it after you've had significant recovery. And so that gave me the urgency to work recovery like I had never worked it before. I did things differently this time that I'd never done before. I started keeping a journal, a daily journal. And in that journal, I did what they call a 10th step, where I would judge what I did the day before and determine what I did wrong, determine what I needed to do to correct it. Do I need to make an amends? And if I do, how am I going to do that? So I journaled my 10th step, as well as I would read scripture every day, and I would journal about what I'd read. And then I would journal my prayers because I would pray while I was journaling and write my prayers out. And I noticed that my prayers changed when I started writing them out. My prayers were a lot more earnest. They were a lot more detailed. And I told God exactly who I am and what I'm dealing with. And I begged his help in dealing with it. After I would write about it, I would often call my sponsor to say, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I think the answer is. Do you see any other thing that I need to be aware of? And usually after praying about it and writing about it and meditating about it, I would generally come up with the answers myself. However, my sponsor contributed a lot to my action based on his input. One of the things that I learned the second go around in my in my recovery in the last 10 years is there's a scripture in Galatians 5 that is a stark contrast between the two ways of living. And it says it's obvious. I'm reading out of the Message. And starting in verse 19 is it's obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. And getting your own way all the time is selfishness and self-centeredness. And that I learned through AA was the core of my issue. Selfishness and self-centeredness, I define as my ego. And so living according to my ego, this is what I got. Repetitive, loveless, and cheap sex. A stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage. Frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness. Trinket gods. Magic show religion. Paranoid loneliness. And I spent a long time in the valley of loneliness. Cutthroat competition. All-consuming yet never satisfied wants. A brutal temper. And sure enough, I had a terrible temper. An impotence to love or be loved. Divided homes and divided lives. And my life was divided because I had a secret life that I lived when nobody was around. And then I had the life that I let other people see, either at church or at work or at school or whatever. And then it goes on and says, small-minded and lopsided pursuits. The vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival. Uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, sure enough. And ugly parodies of community. As I started working on my ego, which I really don't work on my ego, I ask God to control my ego. What I do is try to recognize my ego. And my job is to cooperate with God, not try to do what only God can do. In recognizing my ego, just about any time I feel angst, disturbed, consternation, anything on the inside that hurts is usually connected to my ego. When I recognize these feelings, I would write about them in my journal. And it seemed like they all led back to my ego, and I started recognizing that my ego is not my amigo, as one person liked to call it. It's not my friend. It's my enemy. My ego tells me things to do that are not good. My ego tells me that I deserve things that I don't deserve. My ego tells me that, I'll put it to you this way. My ego is very, very sensitive. It causes the fights that I would have, the arguments that I would have. It would insist that I'm right, whether I was or not. I learned that the opposite of my ego is humility. You know, the 12 steps teach us about humility for the first time in our life, usually. For an addict to talk about humility is you going to the wrong person. If you expect an addict to tell you about humility. And I remember one time I asked my sponsor, what should I be working on? He said, well, what are you working on? I said, my humility. He said, that's the reason you suck at humility. So you're not supposed to be working on it. You're supposed to ask God to do it. And so I quit working on my humility. And what I work on is recognizing my ego. And when my ego is causing pain inside, then I look at what I did wrong. And usually if there's anything wrong, it's because of me. It's not because of somebody else. And how I relate to other people. And a lot of that has to do with expectations. I had expectations on my wives, which they couldn't meet. And so I had troubles in my marriage. I've had expectations with the insurance company. And I had trouble with the insurance company. I had expectations at work, and I had trouble at work. Most of my troubles are centered in my ego. Now, this is all, I learned all this in recovery. I didn't know anything about it before. And so you go on reading in Galatians 5 a little bit further, and it says, but what happens when we live God's way? It says he brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. Serenity has been my goal since I've gotten into recovery. And it took me a long time to get there. It took me learning about my ego before I could ever get there. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. And I spent most of my life trying to force my way in life, trying to force myself on others, trying to, make a living and trying to climb to the top of the career chain. I don't worry about that stuff anymore. And I can tell you, I have finally found serenity. And I would say the word that more describes where I'm at today is the word contentment. I feel content today. And it's because my relationship with God has changed. And I realize that everything I've got today it comes straight from God. It doesn't come to me because I force it through the things that I do or the actions that I take. I just try to do the next right thing and try to follow God's will the best I can. And I've been amazed at what that does for you. I heard people talking about that when I first got to recovery, but it took me a long time for it to sink into my thick skull and get down past my skull down into my heart. And today it finally exists in my heart, and I feel so fortunate because of it. And I know the last 10 years of my life have been very content, very peaceful, and I'm very grateful. And I found too that gratitude is a big part of where I'm at today. When I pray to God, it's mostly prayers of gratitude. I wonder, I remember thinking if I'm writing this out, I'll be writing the same thing over and over and over again, but I've written for the past 10 years thousands of pages in my journal, and hardly any of it is the same thing over and over. It's all new, and it's because I'm so grateful for the new way of life that God has taught me, and that I got from AA and through the 12 steps. So I'm a happy camper. I'm a satisfied customer of the 12 steps, and I guess that's about it.